You won't believe what happened when our HOA tried to arrest my uncle, the same man who signs their legal papers and has the power to overrule every single one of them. People in our neighborhood had seen many fights, many complaints, and many silly HOA rules. But no one expected the day when the HOA would try to take down the very judge they report to. This story still shocks people, and every time I tell it, the room goes quiet because what happened next changed everything. My uncle is a calm man, a man who speaks softly, thinks slowly, and never raises his voice. He believes in fairness, justice, and patience. At the age of 67, he still wakes up before sunrise, makes his tea, and sits outside to watch the morning light. He has lived in this neighborhood for more than 30 years, and people trust him because he always listens first and speaks last. But the HOA? No. They never liked a man they couldn't control. It all started with a letter, a simple white envelope left on my uncle's door. Most people get bills, promotions, or invitations. But my uncle? He got a warning notice. The HOA wrote that he had violated multiple community rules, even though he follows every rule better than anyone else. My uncle looked at the letter, took a slow breath, and said, "This is interesting." When a judge says something is interesting, you know a storm is coming. But he stayed quiet. He didn't fight, didn't argue, didn't call anyone. That silence made the HOA panic. They thought he was scared. They thought they could push him. They thought they could threaten him. But they didn't know they were messing with the wrong person. A few days later, they mailed him a second letter. This one was harsher. The sentences were bold, sharp, and angry. They accused him of refusing compliance and ignoring community authority. My uncle read it again, sipped his tea, and whispered, "I see." That was the second warning, but he still didn't respond. The HOA thought he was weak. They were wrong. Because my uncle wasn't ignoring them, he was giving them enough rope to hang their own mistakes. But the HOA board, full of pride and loud voices, decided to take the biggest step possible, a step that would embarrass them for years. They voted to file a formal complaint against him, not just a warning, but a demand for his removal from the neighborhood. Imagine that, trying to remove a judge from his own home, a judge who signed their approvals, settled their disputes, and corrected their paperwork, a judge who knew more law than all of them combined. But the HOA did not think about consequences. They only wanted power. They came to his door, knocking loudly, shouting his name like he was some criminal. My uncle opened the door slowly, calm as always. He looked at them with soft eyes and said, "Gentlemen, how can I help you?" The HOA leader pointed a finger in his face and said, "You must come with us. You have violated our authority." My uncle smiled gently, not mocking, not rude, just a soft smile that said, "You have no idea what you are doing." And truly, they didn't. One of the board members tried to grab his arm. Another one held papers in front of him as if those papers had any real power. But my uncle stood straight, lifted his head slightly, and said in a firm but calm voice, "Before you go further, please read the name on those documents." They looked down. They blinked. Their faces turned pale. Because right there in bold letters was the truth they had ignored, reviewed and overseen by Judge Samuel Green. My uncle, the man they were trying to arrest, the man whose approval they needed to make any rule legal. At that moment, even the wind felt still. The HOA leader swallowed hard, his hands shook. He stepped back as if someone had pushed him. Another board member whispered, "Wait, he's the judge? The judge we report to?" My uncle didn't raise his voice. He didn't shout. He simply said, "Yes, and everything you've done is now part of a legal file." Silence, heavy and sharp, fell over everyone. What they thought was a victory became their biggest mistake. My uncle calmly reached inside his house, pulled out a thin folder, and handed it to them. "I have documented every letter, every threat, and every false claim. If you want to continue, we can continue in court. But understand, I am not the one breaking rules here." Their confidence vanished. Their power melted. Their pride collapsed. And right there, at his doorstep, the HOA realized they had tried to arrest the one man who had the legal authority to remove them instead. My uncle stepped back, looked at all of them, and said softly, "Now, tell me again, do you still want me to come with you?" No one spoke, no one moved, no one dared. That was the day everything changed. You would think the HOA would walk away quietly after realizing their terrible mistake. You would think they would apologize, shake hands, and try to fix everything before it got worse. But pride, oh, pride is a dangerous thing. It blinds people. It makes simple minds believe they are powerful. And the HOA wasn't ready to let go of their pride, even after standing face to face with the judge they served under. After that shocking moment at the door, the board members walked away slowly, not with dignity, but with confusion. Their steps were heavy, their faces were drained, but the leader, the man who always spoke too loudly and always acted too strongly, whispered to his group, "We can't let him win." Those few words, those foolish, small, poisonous words, became the spark that took this story to the next level. For the next 2 days, the neighborhood felt strange. People were whispering. Doors were opening slightly and closing quickly. Elderly neighbors stood outside longer than usual, pretending to water their plants while secretly checking what was happening. Even children felt something was wrong. The whole street looked like it was holding its breath. My uncle noticed everything. He noticed the tension. He noticed the silence. He noticed how people looked at him with worry in their eyes. But as always, he stayed calm. He poured his morning tea. He took his quiet walk. He nodded politely to everyone who greeted him. He didn't complain. He didn't panic. He didn't confront anyone. At 67, he had lived long enough to know that sometimes the storm must hit before the sky clears. But the HOA wasn't done yet. On the third day, around noon, my uncle heard a loud knock again. Not gentle, not respectful. It was the same kind of knock that tries to shake the soul of a house. When he opened the door, the HOA board stood there. Not with papers this time, not with threats, but with something worse. An official notice taped to a clipboard. "Judge or not," the leader said, "we are filing a community violation case against you." My uncle didn't get angry. He didn't raise an eyebrow. He simply said, "On what grounds?" The leader cleared his throat and replied, "Failure to maintain exterior property conditions and failure to comply with HOA ordinances." My uncle looked at his house confused. The lawn was trimmed. The fence was perfect. The paint was fresh. Every corner of his home was clean and better maintained than half the houses in the neighborhood. He turned back and said, "Would you like to show me the violation?" The HOA leader hesitated. He looked at his board. They looked at him. They all knew. There was no violation. There was no evidence. There was no reason. This was nothing but revenge. But pride pushed them again.
One board member stepped forward and pointed at a tiny patch of grass near the sidewalk, a small yellow spot not bigger than a book. "This," he said nervously, "is a sign of improper lawn care." My uncle stared for a moment, then he leaned down, touched the grass with his fingers, and smiled softly. "This is natural. It happens when the weather changes. You know that." His voice was calm, but his words were heavy. The HOA leader swallowed hard. He knew it. Everyone knew it. But he still forced himself to say, "We're documenting it, and this is your second strike." My uncle stood straight. "And what is the first strike?" They didn't answer. They couldn't answer, because there was no first strike. It was the moment my uncle realized something important. This wasn't about rules. It wasn't about violations. It wasn't even about authority. It was about ego, pure ego. And ego can make people act like fools. He stepped closer, looked directly into the HOA leader's eyes, and said quietly, "If you continue this path, you will be the ones who face consequences, not me." But the leader stepped back and waved the clipboard in the air like a shield. "We are in charge here. You follow our rules." A long silence followed. My uncle took a deep breath and said, "Very well. If this is how you want it, let it be written." That sentence, calm, slow, controlled, carried more power than 100 angry shouts, and every HOA member felt it. That evening, the entire neighborhood buzzed with rumors. People came to my uncle's gate, pretending they were taking a walk, but really trying to find out if everything was okay. Some elderly neighbors knocked gently. One old woman who had known my uncle for 20 years said in a shaking voice, "We are with you. Don't let them hurt you." My uncle placed his hand on hers and said softly, "No one can hurt me if truth stands with me." But he didn't know the HOA's next move would be the most shocking, childish, and dangerous one yet. The next morning, a large sign appeared in front of my uncle's house. Bold red letters, harsh words. It read, "Property under community investigation." It looked like a crime scene. It looked humiliating. It looked cruel. People stared. Cars slowed down. Neighbors whispered. The HOA wanted to shame him publicly. They wanted to break his dignity. They wanted to show power, even knowing they had none. When my uncle walked outside and saw the sign, he didn't get angry. He didn't break it. He didn't shout. He just stood quietly looking at it with tired eyes. At his age, he had seen enough pain to know that sometimes the loudest screams come from the weakest hearts. But the humiliation didn't stop there. Around sunset, the HOA sent another notice, this time threatening a fine of $500 for non-cooperation. My uncle read the paper slowly, folded it carefully, placed it on the table, and said, "If they want a legal battle, I'll give them one they'll never forget." And that was the moment everything changed. That was the moment the judge inside him woke up. That was the moment he decided enough was enough. He opened a thick file he had been quietly preparing, filled with every document, every letter, every threat, every false claim, every violation of HOA conduct. The HOA thought he was silent because he was scared. In truth, he was silent because he was preparing. For 3 long days, he gathered evidence. He noted times. He marked dates. He collected witness statements from neighbors who had seen the HOA harass him. He made copies of all notices. He documented the false accusations. He prepared a legal case so strong that even a senior court would tremble reading it. And then he made one phone call. Not to the police, not to the HOA, not to any neighbor. He called the County Legal Review Board, the highest authority that oversees HOA operations. When the officer on the phone heard his name, she gasped and said, "Sir, we will send someone immediately." That was the day the real fight began. A fight not for pride, not for revenge, but for respect. A fight to show that no one, not even a loud HOA, could stand above justice.
The next morning began like any other day, but something in the air felt different, heavier, quieter. Even the birds seemed to wait for what was about to happen. My uncle woke up before sunrise, made his usual cup of tea, and sat on the porch in his old wooden chair, the same chair he had used for more than 25 years. But today, his mind wasn't calm. Today, he wasn't just a gentle old man. Today, he was preparing for justice. Around 9 a.m., a black SUV slowly entered the neighborhood. People came out of their houses, pretending to check the mail, pretending to sweep their porches, pretending to stretch their legs, but everyone's eyes were on that vehicle. It wasn't police. It wasn't the HOA. It was worse, for the HOA at least. It was the County Legal Review Board. The door of the SUV opened and a tall woman stepped out wearing a neat blue suit. Her footsteps were slow and firm. She walked with a kind of authority that didn't need shouting or anger. She simply existed, and people moved out of her way. She headed straight toward my uncle's house. The HOA members were standing outside their office building on the corner of the street. When they saw her, their faces changed instantly. The leader took off his sunglasses nervously. Another board member hid the clipboard behind his back. One even whispered, "Oh no, this is bad." The woman reached my uncle's porch. "Judge Green," she said politely, "we received your complaint. May we speak inside?" My uncle nodded and guided her in. He didn't act like a man seeking revenge. He acted like someone seeking truth. They sat down at the dining table and my uncle placed the thick file he had prepared in front of her. He said, "This contains everything. Dates, letters, witnesses, threats, violations, every step they've taken against me." The woman opened the file. For the next 20 minutes, the only sound in the house was the turning of paper. Each page she read made her eyebrows tighten, her lips press together, her eyes grow sharper. Finally, she closed the file gently and said, "Judge Green, this is serious, very serious." My uncle replied softly, "It wasn't supposed to be, but they pushed too far." The woman stood up. "I will handle this immediately." She walked out of the house with the file in her hand. The entire street watched. Children stopped playing. Dogs stopped barking. Even the wind seemed to pause. She began walking toward the HOA office, and every step felt like a countdown. The HOA board saw her coming, and panic spread across their faces like fire on dry grass. The leader stepped forward, trying to sound confident. "Ma'am, how can we help you today?" The woman didn't smile, didn't nod, didn't greet him. She held up the file and said, "We need to talk. Now." The board members froze. The leader swallowed hard, then led her into the office. Neighbors gathered outside quietly, pretending to stand around, but everyone's eyes were on that protest of the leader. Inside, the conversation began. The woman spoke first. "I have reviewed all complaints filed by this HOA against Judge Green, and I've also reviewed the evidence he collected." The leader tried to interrupt, but she raised her hand sharply. "Do not speak until I finish." That one sentence shut every mouth in the room. She continued, "Your actions are a complete misuse of authority. You filed false violations, you submitted improper notices, you attempted intimidation, and worst of all, you attempted action against your own supervising legal authority." The room went silent. One board member whispered to another, "We are in trouble." Another one wiped sweat from his forehead. But the woman wasn't finished. She placed the file on the table with a loud thump. "This HOA may face suspension if these claims are proven accurate, and every board member involved will be held responsible." The leader panicked. "Ma'am, we didn't know he was—" She cut him off immediately. Knowing or not knowing does not erase misconduct. Her words fell heavy like stones. The leader stuttered, We were just trying to enforce the rules." The woman replied, "Rules are not weapons. Rules are not tools for revenge, and rules are not excuses for ego.
When she said the word ego, the leader's face turned red. He looked down like a child caught lying. Another board member muttered, "This is a disaster," under his breath. The woman continued, "You will remove every violation issued against Judge Green. You will remove the sign from his property immediately, and you will write a formal apology letter approved by the review board." The leader shook his head desperately. But we can't just apologize after everything." She leaned forward, looked him dead in the eyes, and said, "You don't have a choice." Outside, people watched through the glass windows. The HOA members looked defeated, crushed, like their pride had finally broken. And honestly, it was about time. The woman then stood up and said, "I will now speak with Judge Green once more. When I return, I expect full cooperation." The HOA members stood frozen. Some looked angry, some looked scared, some looked embarrassed, but none of them dared to speak. Back at my uncle's house, the woman approached him and said gently, "Judge Green, please know you have been wronged, and we will make this right." My uncle smiled softly. "Thank you. I only want fairness, nothing more." She nodded. "You will get it." But then she added something unexpected. "Judge, they may not accept this quietly. Pride runs deep in people who misuse authority." My uncle sighed. "Yes, I know, but I've lived long enough to understand that truth always wins, even if the path is painful." She left after that. The SUV drove away, but the neighborhood wasn't calm yet. Whispers continued. People gathered in small groups. The HOA office door stayed shut for the rest of the day. But later that evening, something happened no one saw coming. A letter appeared at my uncle's doorstep. Not typed, not printed, not formal, handwritten, shaky, nervous. It was from one of the HOA board members. Inside it said, "I am sorry. What we did was wrong, but this isn't over. The leader is planning something. Please be careful." My uncle read it twice. Then he folded it slowly and stared into the quiet night. Because now, the fight wasn't just legal. It had turned personal and dangerous. The storm was far from over.
That night, my uncle didn't sleep. Not because he was afraid, but because he knew the truth. People who lose power don't stay silent. They fight harder. They act foolishly. They take risks they should never take. And the HOA leader was exactly that kind of man. Stubborn, loud, and dangerous when cornered. The handwritten apology letter stayed on my uncle's table. He kept looking at it again and again. The shaky handwriting, the short rushed sentences, the warning at the end. Every word screamed fear. Not fear of my uncle, but fear of the HOA leader, a man whose ego had been crushed in front of the whole neighborhood. And when a man's ego breaks, he tries to break someone else. Around midnight, my uncle stood at the window, watching the quiet street. The lights were off in every home. A soft wind blew across the trees. It was the kind of night where nothing should happen, and yet everything was about to. He saw a shadow, a slow, careful shadow, moving near his lawn. Not walking normally, not strolling casually. It was someone trying not to be seen. My uncle narrowed his eyes. His house was dark, but he could see clearly from the reflection of the streetlight. The figure bent down near the small patch of grass, the same patch the HOA had complained about earlier. And then, the man pulled something out of a small bag. My uncle's breath caught. It was a bottle of weed killer. In that moment, everything became clear. The HOA leader wasn't waiting for justice. He wasn't accepting defeat. He wasn't calming down. He was trying to destroy evidence, or worse, create new violations to frame my uncle again. My uncle stepped away from the window and grabbed his phone, but he didn't call the police. No, he wanted proof first. Proof that couldn't be denied. Proof that couldn't be twisted. Proof that would end this war once and for all. He opened his back door silently, walked around the house, and came from behind the bushes toward the lawn.
The man was still bent down, pouring the liquid, muttering angrily to himself. My uncle spoke softly but firmly. Destroying property at night is a serious offense. The man froze. The bottle slipped from his hand. He turned slowly, and it was exactly who my uncle expected. The HOA leader, caught, red-handed, on the judge's property, committing a violation he planned to blame on someone else. The leader's face went pale. This isn't what it looks like. My uncle raised his phone, the camera still recording. It is exactly what it looks like. The leader panicked. He stepped back, tripped slightly, and tried to hide his face. "You can't record me. I'm part of the HOA." My uncle's voice stayed calm. "And I'm the judge who oversees your actions. You should have remembered that before stepping on my property." The leader looked around desperately, like a trapped animal. "Listen, we can fix this. Just delete the video. I'll stop everything. We'll end all charges. Please." My uncle didn't move. He didn't yell. He didn't insult him. He didn't threaten him. He just said one line, a simple line, a cold line, a line that crushed whatever hope the leader had left. Justice doesn't disappear because someone begs. The leader's shoulders dropped. His hands shook. He knew he had lost. He knew this wasn't a fight anymore. It was his downfall. My uncle called the county review officer, the same woman who had visited earlier. Within minutes, police arrived. Yes, police. Not to arrest my uncle like the HOA once tried, but to question the very man who tried to frame him. Neighbors woke up. Lights turned on. People peeked through curtains. Some even came outside in their robes, whispering loudly, shocked at the scene unfolding at midnight. The leader tried to argue. He tried to twist the story. He tried to shout over everyone. But the officer raised her hand. The same way she did earlier. "Not one more word," she ordered. The truth was undeniable. The video was clear. The intent was obvious. The HOA leader was escorted to the patrol car for official questioning. Not arrested, not yet, but taken in for investigation under suspicion of harassment, property damage, and abuse of authority. For the first time, the neighborhood felt safe. For the first time, the loudest voice had been silenced. For the first time, my uncle breathed freely. But this wasn't the end. The next morning, the HOA office stayed closed. Notices were removed from the walls. The big "property under investigation" sign was taken down. 3 board members resigned before noon, and neighbors started leaving food, flowers, and small notes at my uncle's gate saying things like, "You saved us. Thank you for standing up. You protected this community." But my uncle didn't smile. Not yet. Because he knew something important. A storm doesn't end in one night. It ends only when the sky is truly clear. There was still one last step left. One final meeting. One final judgment. And the whole neighborhood would be watching.
The next few days felt different. The neighborhood was quiet, but not fearful anymore. It was the kind of quiet that comes after a long storm. The wind softens, the air feels lighter, and people finally breathe without shaking. But my uncle knew it wasn't over. Peace only comes when wrong is corrected, fully corrected. 3 days later, a special emergency meeting was announced by the County Legal Review Board. Not a normal HOA meeting, not a simple gathering. This was serious. This was official. This was the final chapter. The meeting was set to take place at the community hall, the same hall where the HOA once spoke loudly, acted proudly, and pushed people around with their meaningless authority. Now, for the first time, they would sit quietly. They would answer questions. They would face consequences. My uncle walked toward the hall slowly. People stepped aside as he passed, not out of fear, but out of respect. Elderly neighbors touched his arm gently, whispering, "We're praying for you." Some nodded with pride. Some smiled with relief. One old man even saluted him, saying quietly,
You stood up when none of us could." Inside the hall, the atmosphere was tense. The board members sat on one side, 3 empty chairs where the members resigned. The leader's chair sat empty too. He was under investigation and wasn't allowed to attend. For the first time, the HOA looked small, fragile, weak. The tall woman from the review board, the one with the calm authority, stood at the front. She began speaking. "We are here today because justice must be restored, because power was misused, because a community was harmed, and because one man, the very judge who oversees this HOA, was targeted unfairly." Her words echoed through the room. Every face turned toward my uncle. His hands were folded, his expression calm, his heart steady. She continued, "We have reviewed all evidence. We have spoken with witnesses. We have examined every notice, every false claim, and every attempt to intimidate Judge Green." The room was silent. Even breathing sounded loud. She took a deep breath and said, "Our findings are clear. This HOA board violated multiple legal and ethical standards. They acted with bias, with personal motives, and with intent to damage the reputation of their supervising judge." Gasps filled the hall. Neighbors whispered. Some shook their heads, but my uncle stayed still. The woman then lifted the file, the same thick file my uncle prepared, and held it up. "This evidence shows a pattern of harassment, fabrication, and power abuse, and therefore, everyone leaned forward. This HOA board is hereby dissolved." The room erupted. Some cheered, some cried, some simply sighed with deep, heavy relief. The woman was not done. Furthermore, any future HOA regulations will require direct approval from Judge Green's office until a new, responsible board is formed. This is not punishment. This is protection. People clapped. Others stood up. Even the walls seemed to breathe relief. And then the most powerful moment happened. The woman turned to my uncle and said, "Judge Green, would you like to say something?" My uncle stood slowly. The room quieted again. He looked around at the faces, old friends, neighbors, people he had guided, people who once stayed silent, people who now stood with him. Then he spoke. "I never wanted a fight. I never wanted anyone to fear me. I only wanted fairness. Rules are meant to create peace, not fear. Leadership is meant to guide, not bully. And authority is meant to protect, not punish." His voice was gentle, but every word carried weight. "I forgive those who wronged me, truly, but forgiveness does not erase consequences. I hope they learn from this. I hope we all learn from this." People nodded, some wiped tears, some placed hands on their hearts. My uncle continued, "This community is home. It deserves kindness, patience, and respect. Let us rebuild it together, stronger than before." He sat down, and the hall erupted again, applause louder than anything that building had ever heard. Elderly neighbors hugged each other, grateful that justice lived among them. Later that evening, my uncle returned home. The sun was setting, painting the sky in soft orange and gold. Neighbors lined the street, clapping as he walked by. Not as a judge, not as a hero, but the old man who saved them from fear. He reached his porch, sat in his wooden chair, and finally, after many days, he smiled. The storm was over, justice had spoken, peace had returned. And my uncle, the man they once tried to arrest, became the man the whole neighborhood now looked up to.